I gave her my heart and she traded it for cheap thrills. Name's Cooper Fitzgerald. 48 years old. Spent my life working doors at bars, breaking up fights, and making sure the wrong people stayed on the right side of the curb. Now I run my own private security firm in Charleston, South Carolina. Iron Sentinel Security. Small operation but tight. Trust is everything in this business and I don't give mine easy. Trust was the thing I thought I had with Taylor. I met her 12 years ago when she was a fresh-faced nurse just out of school. Back then she looked at me like I was the strongest man in the world. Maybe I was once. These days I started to notice things. The way she was always tired but suddenly had energy for late-night work dinners. The new perfume that wasn't for me. The little hesitation before answering a simple question. It's the small things that tell the biggest lies. Morning came early, as always. I pulled on my boots, shrugged into my jacket, and stepped out onto the porch. The humidity clung to the air, thick like a second skin. Same routine. Same coffee shop. Murphy's, down on King Street. I pushed through the door, nodding at the familiar smell of espresso and burnt toast. Black, no sugar? Sierra, the barista, barely looked up as she grabbed my usual mug. She was sharp, always watching, always remembering. Yeah, I said, sliding a few bucks across the counter. She handed me the coffee, then hesitated. Your wife's been in a lot lately. I looked at her. That's so? She shrugged, casual but careful. Always with the same guy. Suits. Talks too loud. My grip on the cup tightened. I took a slow sip. Appreciate the info. Didn't say nothing. She gave a quick nod and turned to the next customer. I walked out without another word, my mind already working. It wasn't about emotions. It was about facts. If Taylor was stepping out, I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to be smart about it. Back home, I went straight to the garage, grabbed my toolkit, and popped open her car's trunk. 5 minutes later, a GPS tracker was tucked beneath the lining, completely undetectable. Not my first time using one of these. Sometimes clients wanted surveillance done quietly. This was no different. Just business. I checked my watch. She'd be off in a couple of hours. No reason not to see where she was really going. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my office at Iron Sentinel reviewing some security reports, but my mind wasn't on work. The GPS tracker app sat open on my phone, a single blinking dot showing Taylor's location. Charleston General Hospital. Right where she was supposed to be. At 6:17 p.m., the dot moved. I leaned back in my chair, watching. The route should have taken her straight home. Instead, she went west, toward the waterfront. Then she stopped. The Palmetto Inn. I exhaled slowly. No emotion, just information. I grabbed my keys and walked out. Traffic was thick, but I knew the city's veins better than most. I pulled into the lot of a laundromat across the street from the hotel, a good vantage point, and killed the engine. The sun had dipped low, painting the buildings in long shadows. People walked in and out of the lobby, but I wasn't looking at them. At 6:43 p.m., Taylor stepped out of a black sedan, smoothing her hair, wearing a dress she hadn't worn for me in months. Behind her, a man climbed out of the driver's side. Max Julian. I recognized him from a hospital fundraiser Taylor dragged me to a year ago. Clean-cut, young, the type that shook hands with two hands and laughed too loud at his own jokes. I watched them disappear through the glass doors. I stayed where I was. There was nothing to say. Not yet. I pulled my phone out and snapped a picture. No flash, no sound. Just evidence. Then I opened a new contact and typed out a message. Need some info on a guy. Max Julian. Works at Charleston General. Discreet. I hit send. 5 minutes later I got a response. Give me an hour. I put the phone down and sat there watching the entrance to the hotel, my heartbeat steady. She'd have to come out eventually. They always do. An hour later my phone buzzed. Max Julian. 29. Junior administrator at Charleston General. Ambitious. Got engaged last year, called it off 3 months later. No official reason. Keeps his nose clean, but people say he's got a thing for the nurses. Not the first married one, either. I let the word sink in. A pattern. That was good. Patterns made people predictable. Predictable people were easy to dismantle. The Palmetto Inn's lobby doors opened. Taylor stepped out first, head down, tucking her hair behind her ear. Max followed a little too close, hand grazing her lower back. They talked, laughing at something I didn't care to hear. She climbed into her car, he walked back to his. I snapped another picture. I didn't follow her. I already knew where she was going. By the time I got home, she was in the kitchen, setting down her purse like it had been an ordinary day. I walked in, dropped my keys on the counter. Hey, she said. smiling like nothing had changed. I just looked at her. How was work? She hesitated, just for a second, then smoothed it over. Busy. Long shift. I nodded. That so? Yeah. Non-stop patience. Barely got a break. Lies. Straight to my face. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped the cap, and leaned against the counter, watching her. You eat. Just grabbed something on the way home. I took a sip. What did you have? Another pause. Another moment too long. She smiled again, forced this time. Salad from that place by the hospital. Not the steakhouse Julian took her to 2 weeks ago. I didn't push. Not yet. Let her sit in her lies. Let her build them up, brick by brick, until she was walled in so tight she couldn't breathe. I spent the next few days laying groundwork. Moved a few of her things. Small stuff, nothing obvious. The bracelet her father gave her, the watch she wore every day. Hid them somewhere she'd never think to look. Watched as she searched the house, frustration building. Have you seen my bracelet? She asked one morning, frowning at the jewelry tray on the dresser. I looked up from lacing my boots. Nope. She sighed, rubbing her forehead. I swear. I put it right here. Maybe you left it at work. Maybe, she muttered, distracted. Doubt. That's all it took. Just a seed. I planted another one a few days later, bringing up an old story about a guy we used to know. Remember Mark? Got caught screwing around on his wife. Thought he was slick, but she found out. Took everything in the divorce. Taylor forced a laugh. That was awful. Yeah, I said, watching her reaction. People think they're careful. They're not. She got quiet, turned away to fold laundry that didn't need folding. It was working. Meanwhile, I made sure Julian felt me in the air around him. Not direct, just enough to unsettle him. The first time was at the hospital parking lot. He was heading to his car when I pulled into a space a few feet away. Didn't get out. Just sat there, engine running, watching. He saw me. His whole body went tight. Good. Next time, I sent a message. Anonymous number. Careful who you F* with. Some husbands don't play nice. No response, but I knew he read it. The game was on. A few nights later, I put the next part in motion. McGinty's. A hole-in-the-wall bar. Dark wood. The smell of old whiskey soaked into the walls. It was the kind of place that didn't change, didn't cater to trends, and didn't tolerate idiots. It was also where I knew Taylor and Julian wouldn't show their faces. That made it the perfect place to work. Patty, the owner, was behind the bar, polishing a glass he probably didn't need to. His thick forearms rested on the counter as I slid onto my usual stool. He didn't ask why I was there. He just poured a double of Jameson and set it in front of me. Heard you've been keeping busy. I took the glass, rolled it between my fingers. Something like that. Word gets around. He leaned in slightly. This about your wife? I took a sip, let the burn settle. It's about a problem that needs fixing. Patty nodded like he understood exactly what that meant. You want advice or just the drink? I set the glass down. You've seen enough men come through here, get burned by a cheating woman. What's the move? He smirked. The dumb ones make a scene. The smart ones let the cheaters set themselves on fire. He tilted his head. You're not dumb, Cooper. No, I wasn't. I left McGinty's with a plan. The next morning, I sent an email to Julian's HR department. Anonymous but detailed. Possible ethical misconduct. Max Julian seen inappropriately involved with multiple hospital staff, including at least one married colleague. Public displays noted at outside locations. Might be worth looking into. Sent. Then I made sure Taylor had a reason to start doubting him. I waited until she was getting ready for work, then leaned against the bathroom doorframe, casual. You ever hear anything about Julian and the other nurses? She froze for half a second, just enough for me to see it. What? Couple of the guys at the firm were talking. Said he's got a reputation. Women at the hospital. Gets close, then moves on. Her reflection in the mirror didn't move. Then she forced a little laugh. That's just gossip. Maybe. I shrugged. But you know how people talk. Probably doesn't look good, though. Junior admin sleeping around. Probably bad for promotions. She didn't say anything, just kept fixing her hair, but her hands were a little stiffer than before. By the time she left, I knew I'd done what I needed to. The doubt was planted. The trust was cracking. And when Julian found out about the email, he'd start unraveling too. It was only a matter of time before they turned on each other. The first sign of the fallout came faster than I expected. Taylor was distracted, checking her phone more, biting her nails, something she only did when she was stressed. I didn't ask, just watched. A couple of days later, I was in my office when a text came through from one of my guys. Looks like your boy Julian's sweating. HR pulled him in this morning. He didn't look happy coming out. Good. I took a sip of my coffee and leaned back in my chair, waiting. Taylor came home late that night. Walked in, dumped her bag on the table, sighed like she'd been carrying the weight of the world. I didn't say anything at first. Just let her move around, let her feel the space between us. Eventually, I looked up from my laptop. Long day? She rubbed her face. Yeah. Work's been weird. Weird how? She hesitated, picking at the hem of her sleeve. Just stuff at the hospital. Admin rumors. People getting questioned. I nodded like I didn't already know. That right? Yeah. She let out a slow breath, then forced a smile. Probably nothing. Probably. I let it go, but I could see it in her posture, in the way she kept looking at her phone like she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. The next night, I went back to McGinty's. Patty was behind the bar as usual, wiping down glasses that didn't need wiping. The place was quiet for a Friday, just a few regulars nursing their drinks. You ever notice, I said as I sat down, how people think they're smart, but they're really just predictable? Patty smirked. You mean like cheaters? Exactly like cheaters. He poured me a whiskey. So what's the next move? I swirled the glass, watching the amber liquid coat the sides. Now I let them destroy each other. Because the thing about people like Julian? They were only loyal when it served them. And Taylor? She wanted to feel special, needed. But once doubt creeped in, once she started wondering if she was just another name on his list, she'd start looking at him differently. The cracks were already forming. 2 days later, I saw it firsthand. I was at Murphy's early, same as always. Sierra handed me my coffee without a word, but as I turned to leave, she spoke. Saw your wife the other day. She looked off. Yeah? She nodded, glancing around before lowering her voice. She was here with that guy. Same one. But this time, they weren't all smiles. What did you hear? She shrugged. Didn't catch much, but she looked pissed. He kept trying to explain something. She just shook her head and left. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting that settle. Appreciate it. Didn't say nothing. By the time I got home that night, Taylor was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, chewing on her lip. She barely looked up when I walked in. I set my keys down. Something wrong. She hesitated. I had a weird day. I nodded, grabbing a beer from the fridge. That right? She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. You ever feel like you made a mistake, but you don't know how to fix it? I cracked the bottle cap off against the counter. Yeah, I said, taking a sip. But usually, by the time you realize it, it's too late. She looked at me then, really looked. Her throat bobbed. Yeah, she murmured. I guess it is. I didn't say anything else. Just let her sit in it. Because I already knew she'd lost. She just hadn't figured it out yet. A week later, it all came crashing down. I was at the office, finishing up some reports when my phone buzzed. A message from one of my guys. You're gonna want to see this. Attached was a photo. Julian, standing outside the hospital, arguing with Taylor. His hands were up like he was explaining something, trying to smooth things over. She wasn't having it. Arms crossed, shoulders tight, face like stone. I leaned back in my chair, watching the screen. It was playing out exactly how I knew it would. Julian was scrambling, trying to control the damage. But Taylor? She'd started waking up. She came home late that night. Didn't look at me when she walked in, just threw her bag onto the counter and went straight to the bedroom. I followed. Leaned against the door frame, watching as she sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on her knees, hands clasped together like she was holding herself together. Rough day? She flinched, then let out a breath. Yeah. I took my time, pulling off my jacket, setting it on the chair. Want to talk about it? She shook her head. It's nothing. I nodded, let the silence stretch. Julian's in trouble at work. Her head snapped up. How do you, Word gets around. I held her gaze, steady, unshaken. You looked pretty pissed at him today. Her lips pressed together. He's not who I thought he was. I let that sit. Took my time unbuckling my belt, slipping it through the loops, folding it neatly. Who'd you think he was? She swallowed. Looked down at her hands. Someone who actually cared. I scoffed, shook my head. Yeah. That he made you feel real special, didn't he? She winced. I grabbed the chair, turned it around, sat down in front of her. Let me tell you something about guys like Julian. They don't love. They don't sacrifice. They take what they want when they want it, and when it stops being convenient, they move on. You weren't the first. You won't be the last. Her eyes were glassy now, but I didn't care. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for herself. I leaned in, voice low, steady. You had a man who would have gone through fire for you. And you threw him away for a smooth-talking little climber in a cheap suit. She looked away, shame settling in, heavy and thick. I stood, grabbed my jacket. I'll be out late. She didn't ask where I was going. I went to McGinty's. Patty took one look at me and poured a double. I took the stool, rolled the glass between my fingers. Over? He asked. I took a slow sip. Almost. She know. I nodded. Yeah. She knows. Good, he said, wiping down the counter. Then it's time to move on. He was right. By morning, the papers were on the table. Divorce. Clean. No drawn-out fights, no negotiations. I'd already locked down my assets. The house was mine. My accounts were untouched. She'd get a little money, enough to get by, but nothing more. She came downstairs, saw them, went still. I'll be staying with my sister for a while, she said quietly. I nodded. Good idea. She looked at me then, really looked like she was seeing me for the first time in months. Maybe years. You were a good husband, she said. I met her gaze, voice flat. I know. She swallowed, nodded, picked up the papers. And that was that. By the end of the day, she was gone. And I didn't look back. A month passed. Everything settled the way it was supposed to. Julian was gone. Word around the hospital was he resigned to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew what that meant. The HR investigation never went public, but it didn't have to. His name carried weight now, just not the kind he wanted. No promotions. No job security. A reputation that made people second-guess hiring him. Taylor stayed with her sister. I didn't ask, didn't check in. That door was closed. She texted once, something about wanting to talk when things weren't so raw. I left it on read. There was nothing to say. McGinty's felt different that night. Lighter. Patty slid me my usual without a word. The regulars nodded my way like they'd been following the whole thing from a distance and were just now seeing how it ended. You look like a man who won, Patty finally said, wiping down the bar. I took a sip of my drink, let it sit. I didn't win, I said. I just didn't lose. He smirked. That's the same thing. Maybe it was. Work picked up. The firm had more contracts than ever, word getting around that Iron Sentinel was the place to go if you wanted security handled right. A couple of my guys even joked that my zero tolerance for bulls **T was good for business. Maybe they were right. One evening I was in Murphy's, same seat, same coffee, when Sierra set the mug down in front of me. She studied me for a second, arms crossed. You seem different. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Yeah. Less tense. Like you took out the trash and finally opened the windows. I smirked. Something like that. She leaned on the counter. And the wife. X. Her mouth twitched. Right? X. She's still coming in. Haven't seen her. Good, she said. She didn't tip anyway. I let out a short laugh. First real one in a while. The air smelled better. The coffee tasted stronger. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about balance. About making sure people didn't get away with things they shouldn't. Some men let things like this break them. Some crawl back, beg, let themselves get walked over. That wasn't me. Never was. I finished my coffee, left a 20 on the counter, and stepped outside. The sun was low, the heat settling into something comfortable. I took a deep breath, rolled my shoulders. It felt good. Solid. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead was wide open. And I was ready to walk it.